Let's discuss parts 11 through 20. I continue to be pleased that this is not an overly long winded book and it's pretty concise for the most part. So getting through segments hasn't been too bad, in my opinion. I don't know if anyone else feels different.
Yeah, that is true, but I find there's a lot of jumping around between topics, kind of. I mean, obviously because people ask questions, but uh, the questions kind of go in different directions, if that makes
I
sense.
think that goes back to what we were discussing last week of how this is not a book that was written to have a cohesive thought process
Mm,
so much as a
yeah,
compilation of sayings and responses to real world discussions that he was having.
yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
I think I prefer when they're actually written, like when the thoughts are organized instead of just kind of like
Yeah,
spilled out all over the place.
Yeah.
I'm inclined to agree.
Well, if it gets too painful, we can set this book aside and find a new one.
I'm managing, but I mean, for the next book,
Maybe something
in
with a little
general,
more
Yeah,
cohesion.
yeah.
All right.
intentionally structured.
That makes sense.
Like that.
Part
But for
11.
now, yeah,
I
genau.
highlighted 3 things. Um, he states that awareness makes consciousness, that realization is the opposite of ignorance, and instead of seeing things as imagined, we need to learn to see them as they are. And that is how I mentally summarized that segment, was just those 3 statements.
Yeah, that seems fair enough.
um, part 12 was an interesting thought experiment where he was something along the lines of the mind looks after the body, which is to me when you like talk to someone who's like, you ever thought about breathing and how you don't have to think about it until you think about it? It was
Yeah,
kind of the vibe I got from that conversation.
I I have a I liked some of the things he said, and in other ones I was like, come on.
Come
Like
on, buddy.
the second paragraph there was saying you may not be quite conscious of your physiological functions, but when it comes to thoughts and feelings, desires and fears, you become acutely self-conscious, which is very true. Just
Mm-hmm.
observing everybody, this is people ignore, I mean, some people ignore their bodily functions like so much that they're neglecting their bodies and very out of tune physically. And I think some of that may be cultural. The way that we live isn't really good for well-being in general,
Mm-hmm.
but people are definitely self-conscious, like aware of how they're feeling, even if
Mm-hmm.
they're not necessarily able to communicate it very well, but they're very in the emotion. They're aware that something is happening when it's
yeah,
happening, and they're very like the feeling is really strong until they learn how to do something about it. But then the second half of that paragraph, when he's saying for him those things are unconscious, which okay, fine, but I find myself talking to people or doing things quite correctly and appropriately. Like, oh yeah, okay.
Do you, buddy?
I
I think he's
kind of
perhaps he's saying that he's doing things according to custom or to what's the word, to etiquette, and not
Yeah.
necessarily that he doesn't make mistakes or something like that, or maybe he doesn't, but I think he just lets things and actions just flow without doing them consciously or yeah,
Mm-hmm.
being
I don't
active, so to speak.
I think you're right that the intention with the way that this is worded isn't necessarily that he's like incapable of doing wrong or anything like that, but that it's just it's just easy. It just kind of happens. I don't like
Yeah,
as your physical. responses are unconscious, so are my emotional ones, or my like everything I respond completely. But it kind of, I don't, is that, this is the complete opposite of what we've been talking about in Buddhism, actually, I think.
Well, that was part of the reason this book was chosen, was a general sense that I keep getting from people that they'd like us to explore less Mahayana.
I think. Go ahead, Dessa.
I was just gonna say, and just go off on a slightly different branch, because a lot of what we discussed is very much the Mahayana, the middle path, and all of that. And so
this isn't even Buddhism at all, though.
yeah, this isn't even So this goes off in a completely different direction. I don't know. It was recommended.
I think.
Well,
I think he says in some other section that before you get to the point where you are acting appropriately automatically, it has to be practiced. So the more you practice, the more automatic it becomes. And and at some point you don't need to steer your actions. You just can let them happen because they are quote unquote programmed in the right way. That's at least the impression I got.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I don't know. I like being poked to think a little differently from a different direction, so I don't mind some of the things he's saying. I just kind of like mentally organize it like that. I'm gonna sit over there. I like this part.
And I
yeah,
feel
I guess.
like, real quick, I feel like even though it isn't Buddhism, what he describes as, you're not really a person and your awareness. I mean, okay, he, he is very much in that there is the true self, which Buddhism kind of denies, but uh, I mean, both are saying that you are not your person, you are not your thoughts, you are not things that are constantly changing and arising and passing away. I mean, so even though they have kind of a different view, they have also a huge overlap.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, which actually that's related to what I was going to say, which is following from last week on book club. In our other book, we were talking about, he had all these excerpts from so many different practitioners and various religious figures, like people who followed many different paths, who ultimately came to a very similar awakening.
Yeah.
And some kind of like core truth about life, that even there, although there were differences in how they came to it, and there may be differences in the way that they understood it, they all spoke about this thing that was the same.
Yeah.
And so now reading this, I'm like looking at which things are, where's the overlap, which part sounds like these other things we read,
Right.
and then which ones are completely different. And that one, I'm mainly pointing out that I noted that was like literally the opposite. So there is a lot of overlap still, but that particular thing
Right.
was saying, like, if you're doing it right, you don't pay attention to anything anymore. It just happens on its own. And although at the core of that, it's still that if you're practicing, things do become much easier. It's the sort of mindlessness struck me, the way that he talks about this.
But maybe that is the mark of the master, that he doesn't need to focus anymore.
He's become so mindful. He's turned it around. It doesn't have to be mindful anymore.
Yeah, like that.
Amazing.
I mean, first off, I understand exactly what you mean with this, because like it does appear as though they're saying, "Oh, I don't have to pay attention at all. It's groovy, man. It just happened." And through my exploration of like Advaita Vedanta, stuff like that, which is what this is from. There is a stark difference in how sort of it gets described, because yeah, with Buddhism it's very active, mindful, pay attention, and with this one it's more of a turn your senses away, uh, go within, stick with only the I am.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like a different path that has a very similar result, but the way it is interpreted, the way that they follow it, is, at least contextually, seems entirely opposite. But the practice itself isn't. Although it's hard to like explain why it isn't. I don't know. I don't even know if it makes sense.
You make sense to me, Max, but only because I feel very similarly, I think. And so I'm coming with a less of a learning curve on that particular thought process.
That's actually an interesting thing, an interesting comment to say, oh, it's the same, but I can't explain why, because I kind of feel like this guy can't explain why either.
Well, okay, so
Like
there is a mindfulness element of remaining focused on the I am and discarding all other sensory inputs, or whatever, that mainly actually just thought inputs, um, such that you maintain and develop this very grounding center of beingness, which is kind of like what Eckhart Tolle was on. You know, you remember him. Um, but it's less focus on the attention of, you know, mindfulness and all that, and more just stay with this one thing. So that in that way, it's still mindfulness. It's just the subject of mindfulness is very single pointed. It's not like try this meditation and then go do this other one and then, you know, maybe go for a walk. No, it's just cut and dry. Here's this one thing. Look at this root. Everything else will fall away once you get it. So there's less like, I suppose, methodology to it. And that's kind of a double-edged sword, because it's either you do this or you don't do it. But also, like, what if someone doesn't have an easy time just doing that? Maybe there's a new way to get into it. So I was like, all right, go check out Buddhism, you know.
Hmm.
Personally, I like both schools. I mean, they're both Vedic uh, in lineage. So I think they complement each other, even though some of their practices or um, maybe tenets of their metaphysics disagree. Because I know that with this, there's like the jiva, the inner soul, and then there's the rupa and all this other stuff. Whereas in Buddhism, it's like, no, you're empty. Stop it. There's nothing. But it's the same thing. It's just different words.
Yeah.
Yeah. Go, Max.
Yeah.
Learninate. Part 13. I don't remember a lot about it. Supreme the mind and the body.
There.
I highlighted the opening is not even the light. Oh yeah, it is just an opening. It's talking about a hole in a piece of paper, I think. Comes up.
that's a really interesting comparison. A hole in the paper is both in the paper and yet not of paper. Like, yeah.
Yeah.
Or a hole in general, like the absence of a thing.
Then we get lots of more of these little weird questions. Are you not conscious of my question? Consciousness itself is the source of everything.
that's the underlying theme, really.
Yeah. If reality leaves no evidence, there's no speaking about it. That's not a question.
Right.
So lots of back and forth. Oh yeah, not making use of one's consciousness is samadhi. I highlighted. I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, that's basically going back to what he said earlier, that he isn't focusing on his actions. He's just
Right.
leaves his mind and his body be, and it all happens on its own. And that's what he calls samadhi here.
Yes.
I think he makes this distinction between consciousness and awareness, and I feel like awareness is this space, whereas consciousness is something like focus, if that makes sense. Whereas, or the attention, where you direct your attention, or something like that. So yeah, it can be a little bit confusing, or you need to be really
So
be on your
my
guard.
my understanding of this, when he's saying consciousness, is like um that ego identity, but it's less defined that way. Um, but to like just leave your mind alone. That's that's that whole returning to the I am and no later
Mm-hmm.
thoughts have any relevance thing. I find it almost amusing how many different ways they could say, just look at this thing.
Just look at it.
Just fucking look at this one thing, man.
Look at it.
But yeah, I have found a lot of the time that the way things get translated is only like partially getting at what they mean,
Oh, absolutely.
and it's a little disheartening. But
Oh.
if you think about it and you look at the whole thing, you can use context clues. I just wish there was a language that was precise.
Just using. It's like solving a puzzle inside a puzzle.
Right, I don't need all that. I'm just trying to get enlightened.
Bruh.
I mean, yeah,
You must begin with yourself. Not the world's sorrows.
that's fair.
Because the questioner is like, all I want to know is how do I deal with the world's sorrows? And I'm like, man, don't we all? If I could solve those things, oh, I don't know if I'd be rich, but I'd probably be better off. I like this part. I'm fond of it, where he's asking this question and he and then he goes, "These are but the stirrings of a man who is tired of sleeping. They are not the causes of awakening, but its early signs." And I always enjoy the imagery we use when discussing awakening. And I like when we actually refer to the before the awakening.
Mhm.
Of, okay, I'm tired of sleeping now. Sam has joined us.
Yes, I'm here now.
A Sam. Sam, enlighten us.
On what?
Everything.
It.
It.
Okay. It is all.
Perfect.
And so it is done.
He talks a lot in the next couple sections about desirelessness, and the questioner's like, "You don't want anything, nothing," and he's just like, "I observe, want, but do not cling to it." He doesn't put it that way, but that's kind of the vibe I get of. He recognizes that want is just happening, but he doesn't let it become anything else. But at first, the questioner is very like, "What? What do you mean you don't want anything?" I like the discussion of our types of teachers being milestones instead of an end-all be-all. I think that's interesting. Sorry, moving
Yes,
my oil heater.
is it like that? The whole jhana concept in Buddhism. Once you have made use of a tool to its end, you pick another tool or something like that.
Yeah. Yeah. I thought this might be something interesting. I don't know if you guys have any commentary on it. He says, seeing the false is meditation. This must go on all the time.
Yep. I mean, that's, you know, same thing as seeing clearly, knowing things for what they are. The whole "it must go on all the time" thing is just a, like, this isn't a part-time deal. You're either in it or you're not. Are you down to clown, bro? Is basically what they're saying.
Yeah.
Do.
I want there to be a
That is
guru that like does guitar riffs and says memes while also dropping hot wisdom.
That's gonna be you someday, Max.
Oh God, you're right.
You're that guru.
It's me. I'm what I wanted.
just wait 45 years and you'll have.
Right.
But that part is, I think there's some. I mean, it's a very, very, very simplified, short version of a lot of the, right perception and right consciousness and all of that.
Mm-hmm.
It's just instead of having this whole long explanation of like meditate and see correctly what's false and therefore what is true. They're just like, well, if you see it, that's meditation. Just go do that a bunch.
Just go do that lots.
I love Vedanta so much because it's so fucking straightforward and to the point, whereas Buddhism's like, oh, you want to learn? Here's 8 lists, memorize them. It's just like, man, it's the
And the
same
list,
thing though. The lists have
the 8
lists.
lists are like the 6 blah blah blah, the 5 blah blah blah, the 11 blah blah blah.
It's just like, oh God, it's homework.
It's too much homework.
And each list references the other list too.
Oh yeah, yeah. You can't just have one. You need every list to know what any of them are.
Refer to the other list.
Yep, it's just a fucking spider web of, notation here, cited here. It's just like, what? No.
No. No. The ever present. I didn't highlight anything here.
Good.
Delayed response is wrong response. I'll highlight that. To know what you are, find what you are not. Also, apparently didn't highlight anything here.
Yeah, that goes back to the whole idea of Vedanta, that the true reality, or whatever you want to call it, cannot be described by attributes, but rather by the denial or the removal of all attributes. I don't know if that's what he says in this message, but that's something I heard at another point about Advaita.
19. Reality lies in objectivity. Oh, I highlighted this because, of course, it references a painter, and I'm like, yes, art. I see a painter painting a picture. The picture I call the world. The painter I call God. I do not create, nor am I created. I contain all. Nothing contains me.
Yeah, so
I-
you make the
That sounds
distinction.
pretty.
It makes a distinction between gods, between
Mhm.
God and the ultimate reality.
It is interesting though because in other parts he says there is no distinction between him and God.
I mean, in the end, yeah. I mean, when there's non-duality, there
But
can't be a distinction.
yeah.
Well,
When
I mean, yeah, there's that whole the inner awareness, that consciousness itself, uh, that seer of the scene is no different than God, because that's just the ever-pervasive beingness of reality. And once you jettison your identity as a human, you become beingness, and you are one with reality.
I want to be a
Therefore,
bean.
you are God. You could be a bean. Join me in my bean ways.
What kind of bean will I be?
Uh, Pinto.
I love pinto beans.
Mm-hmm.
Delicious.
That's your beans classification.
Thank you.
You don't want to be a person? Be a bean.
I'm in. Ben's like 75% of the way to being a bean. He just needs to add a letter.
Oh, wow. Ben, you've been doing a lot of bean work, I see.
Mhm.
I'm so sorry, guys. I'm so tired. My son's
That's
been
all right.
teething and sick,
Ah,
and
that's why the screaming is happening. I see.
I'm so tired. Yeah, he's not having a good day. He's having a bad day today. The Supreme is beyond all.
I
Seeking
like
out.
that made you giggle.
Yeah, I don't know. I gotta find humor somewhere in my world. Seeking out causes is a pastime of the mind. There is no duality of cause and effect. Everything is its own cause.
Yep.
Yep.
That's that interdependent arising.
And then I highlighted silence knows itself. It is the silence of the silent mind when passions and desires are silenced. And I have to do, I only really highlighted it because it said silent so many times.
Wow. I mean, yeah.
Can make a lot of words about these things. But what are you gonna do when people keep asking?
Yeah. I'm sure at some point he's just like, now I'm just going to say gibberish.
The very last bit on this section was pretty good though.
Mm-hmm.
About desires, right after what you highlighted there.
Mm.
Like basically saying that if we read it, desires are just waves in the mind. You know a
Mhm.
wave when you see one. A desire is just a thing among many. I feel no urge to satisfy it. No action needs to be taken on it. Freedom from desire means this: the compulsion to satisfy is absent. So he says desires don't go away. You're always going to have them, but the thing that we're doing to be free from desire doesn't mean to have no desire. It means to be free of the compulsion to satisfy the desire.
Yeah.
So you still have them, and then they pass the same way as the emotions and everything else.
Desires are no longer desirable.
So to speak.
Yeah. Nothing
Yeah.
happens. They're just kind of there, and then they're not there.
Mm-hmm.
The attachment, the striving bit again.
Yeah.
Perfect. Anyone else have thoughts on parts 11 through 20?
Not overly much, no.
All right, go team. I don't know that we reached enlightenment this week, but we are rubbing the crusties out of our eyes and trying to wake up,
Circling around it.
circling around it, and yeah,
One day.
Good job,
someday.
Ellie.